a conflicting moral vision. From my point, in my moral vision, from the stories that I structure that particular choice, I could not make that choice. But well, I won't put words in Dr. Roberts' mouth. I have read her pieces on divine law and who was God's talking, so I'll pass it. Well, maybe it's somebody who quoted you. And you had I won't defend your point of view. But my point of view, somebody quoted you. I'll send you the quotes. It's amazing what you find on the internet quoted.
Maybe some other Dr. Roberts.
So it was a discussion on diversity of ethics. But anyhow, for me, looking at the stories that of Scripture where I contextualize that kind of decision making, I do not think the individual has the wisdom to be able to make that decision, which is why I prefer allowing caring for sure to all, to the furthest extent one can, if one cannot cure, caring, and then permitting, and this is, I'm forgetting we got into this, no extraordinary means, but ordinary means in order to preserve the person's dignity.
I always, when my students tell me what God thinks, I always want to know who's God. And there is not a God. There is not one God, at least as far as human beings are concerned. There's a reason that there are different denominations in the Protestant religion, and that there are gods in all. There are many points of view about what God thinks. I personally, a long time ago, as a teenager, realized that nobody can know what God thinks. And from my point of view, a finite mind has a very difficult mind encompassing an infinite mind. And so I don't have an answer to your question because I don't know which God you're talking about.
Christian God.
There are multiple Christian gods. Otherwise, there wouldn't be Methodists, Episcopalians, Congregational. There are reasons that the denominations exist.
But you just mentioned that he was eternal. How can you, you just referenced that he was an all-knowing God.
I am not a theologian, and I'm not going to argue about God with you.
Okay. Next question. Yes.
So this was kind of similar to 2 questions ago, but for example, if someone was a normal, healthy person, but for some reason they got in a car crash and they had lots of injuries that could be healed, but they became brain dead, so they were essentially in a coma that they would never ever wake up from. Well, with our current medical, our medical world as it is, what would be the ethical action for either the family or the physician, since no one could really make the judgment about, does this person want to die or is it right for them to die? And this is directed towards either of you.
There are 2 difficulties with the way that's laid out, and this is the problem of not being in a concrete situation. There are people who are comatose who said that individuals and the prognosis is that they would never recover. They would never become aware again, and there's it's on the fringes, but there are a sufficient number of people who become aware. There was one case in New Mexico where the person was out since Ronald Reagan and came back to. And lo and behold, she was horrified when she realized, I won't say aware what was going on and who was in power. But that was sort of that was a very interesting case. So I'm probably hesitant as to saying someone in a coma cannot come out. There's sufficient amount of data. As I asked this question to a neurologist. He said I can get brainwaves out of Jello. I'm not sure about it. I've never seen brainwaves from Jello. Some bases it might be not too dissimilar than my own.
Or you might be careful about going to that doctor.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, there's always room for Jello. So you feel that there are places where let me give you a really hard. I'll give you one of the most painful cases I've ever been to. all right? And I'll lay this one out. I think it should, I hope it will clarify. And I'll have to do it, we'll try to keep confidentiality though it was in the paper. There was a notable figure in the West Coast who had a child that was playing a particular sport. The individual went into a asthmatic seizure and then went into cardiac arrest, and the heart was destroyed. They rushed him to a high-end, very well-known hospital where he's put on a special type of ventilation and cardiac, a device that took over the cardiac system for the young fellow, for the young individual. And what happened then is that they were waiting for the parents were waiting for a transplant. It went on 3.5 months, and there were no transplants available yet, and he had the resource allocated. All right? Well, that's fine. There's no problem until, and this happens in certain type of respirators, aspergillus, which is a fungus, got into the machine, and it does you no matter how you keep it sterile, and they detected it in his eye fluid. There have been absolutely 0 positive outcomes when aspergillus is, as far as organ transplant, and aspergillus is present, so the transplant team says, no, we will not transplant. The dilemma then became, there are only a certain small number of these particular devices that are available. This person was not brain dead. This person was sapient and conscious. But there is no hope of transplantation. So they wanted a second opinion as to what to do. And all the medical ethics consults, that is the one that is most difficult that I've ever been in, and the one that's most haunting. These were Christians. So we walked through different points of view of how they can address it, including prayer to see if indeed there could be some kind of healing. I don't write that off. That did not happen. And the question came then, how can that young one die in the arms of those who love them in a way that is an agape way, a way that they're there for the person and that young person's there for them? Because they're not going to transplant, and basically people are dying because of the machine. He had that access, that's the only machine available. So what would you do? What would you do?
Well, I'm in no position to make any kind of...
No, I mean, but sometimes there's an oughtness in our very being that tells you what we ought to do. That's the first question when I go to medical ethics consult is, the what ought I to do? There is a compass that you have a gut feeling and oughtness, and we have to clarify that. Then we look at who's making the decision and what value system they're operating on. So what would you do?
Well, again, I don't feel comfortable making a gut decision on this kind of situation because, well, I haven't had a good enough time to think about it, and I haven't been exposed to all that many.
Fair enough.
So that's why I was asking, you guys, if
that was a discontinuation. That was a withdrawing of life support.
Okay, but
and it was a loving way. It was also done in a way where the individual had a sufficient amount of narcotic, not to kill them, but in order to suppress ear hunger.
But he was conscious?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know what you
In a case like that, I would let nature take its course.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we only have time for 2 more questions. So, in the red.
Dr. Wernow, I have a question for you. You took the position, euthanasia, a good death, and you said yes and no. Now, if we're talking about good, a lot of times people say good as in suffering. Suffering is not good. I understand the position of how no, do not do euthanasia because you want to keep the suffering going on, whatever it's God's life type of thing. So for you, what is the time when euthanasia is a yes, it is a good death? Since you said yes and no, what's the yes time?
The yes in time is that, first of all, if you remember, I laid out 2 notions of euthanasia. All right, you recall that? I defined my terms. and one was a medical application for the termination of human life. For me, that is a no. The second use, which was also part found in antiquity, was to palliate the suffering. I don't think that suffering should be there just for the sake of suffering, or even to force an individual. I don't believe that at least the tradition and text that I study, I don't see that there. I see that if the human person can show God's mercy, then we palliate the suffering. All right? So what is a good death? Is to, when there is three criteria. If the disease state is irreparable, if the situation is irreversible, and if death is imminent, and people who work in the field of hospice know that death is imminent, there should not be extraordinary means to force the individual to live beyond that, but there should be a caring going on until the person then dies from the disease and where the disease takes them. All right. So but that necessarily wouldn't be a good death. If you listen very closely, I say a good death is a death that precludes second death. And for me, that is my point. And that's a little out there for many of you, but it's what we have to wrestle with. It's what actually led me even to a place where I'm at, sitting in this strange chair, when someone asked me, what do you think happens to you, Jerome? Do you think when you die you just rot in the grave? It caused me not to put the needle in my vein and push the potassium chloride in when I was rightly removed from the university for doing, let us say, too many strange experiments in psychoneuropharmacology. Which, by the way, is partly how I got the tip.
And our last question. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So this is a question that A is loaded, and B is an effort to get at the distinction between passive and active euthanasia that you differ on. I'm trying to explore the idea that there might be a prior concept to autonomy. It seems to me like the evidence in life is much stronger for the idea that we're really given everything. We're even given autonomy. We're given daily oxygen, we're given our food, we're given our water, we're given our life. And so if that's the case, then since we didn't autonomously create any of these things, they're all in a sense gifts. Why should we not favor a view that we're to steward those gifts, even the gift of autonomy, rather than to autonomously eliminate them, specifically life? Does that make sense?
That sounds to me very much like life is God-given, and therefore it's up to God to end. And that's the point of view that I personally don't share. And I don't mind that anybody else has that view. I think that I am a manifestation of the life force writ large, for example. My point of view comes much more closely to Buddhism and quantum mechanics and Hinduism than to the idea that somehow I am a product of a conscious intelligence who created me and I belong to her.
You've articulated my position, so unless you want me to restate the position you articulated.
You can put it much better than I can.
So.
That was actually very clever.
It's accurate relative to how I review it. So that life is a gift, and we are stewards of it, including the autonomy.
Well, at this point, we would like to give the two speakers the occasion to offer their closing remarks. If you can keep them brief. Dr. Roberts, if you'd like to go first.
I forgot, that's the one part I forgot to do, the closing remarks. I just think that this, as I've spent quite a bit of time preparing for this, reading literature, both from the theological point of view and from the philosophical point of view, and this is such a complex, for me, very complex issue. It has all kinds of subtle distinctions that we kept asking for, give us a concrete case. So I think it actually boils down to the actual person who is the patient embedded in their